Morning. Thank you for having us. So as Kat said, last year we did a lightning talk, so we thought it would be good to return to kind of give a little bit more detail about the things that we've learned over the course of the project. So just a few quick introductions before we get started. So I'm Rob, Digital Marketing Manager at the University of Derby. Pete is our Senior Web Developer, and this is Nick from Decent, the agency that we work with on this project. So on the 2nd of July last year, we launched a completely new website. The project has since evolved, and we've gone on to build other sort of websites that fall off the back of that. But last year's IWMW was only 1 week after the launch of the website, so last year was kind of R&R, forgetting about it a little bit. So today we just want to kind of go back through it and identify what we learned, because over the last year it's been a lot of reflection. And as I mentioned last year, we delivered the project in about a 10-month time period. So it was a period we were very, very proud of. There were some things that we had to make sure we got into that project, and other things that we had to delay for later on. So, project scope. We knew the project that was going to be a big project. University websites aren't small. We knew a lot of things needed fixing. We knew there were vast volumes of out-of-date content, poorly written content, and quite a lot of concerns about accessibility of the whole site. It was a case of too many people had contributed to that website over the years, and so we ended up with, at that point, 12,000 pages of stuff. The project boiled down to addressing the underinvestment, under-resourcing of the site over the previous years, and what we needed to do was to set the university on a path that was sustainable for the website, as opposed to, in another 3 years' time, go back after some more money and do it all again. There was a recognition across the organisation that the website was our shop window, and that recognition was growing, whereas before I don't think that was necessarily there, and that the first experience our audience had of the university was often the website, so I had to really make an impression on them. If we didn't make the right impression, they'd probably go on to another university website and go elsewhere. So despite what I've just said, we did start from quite a good place. We had a rebrand that was delivered weeks, months before we started the project. So that rebrand was from a creative point of view, but also from an ambition point of view and what the university wanted to achieve. So it set us in quite a good position from that point of view. And while it gave us some creative guidelines, it also gave us some creative freedoms, because we were allowed to push what they'd done with the branding. What we wanted to achieve over the project was a complete rebuild from the ground up, so we didn't want to sort of build on anything we'd done before. We wanted to kind of start again. We wanted to bring it in line with the new visuals of the branding, and we had to make sure that we were demonstrating a bold, a creative and innovative organisation, which we want to be, and we are. We also needed to replace our search functionality. We used a combination of Google Custom Search and Terminal 4 Search. The combination, it didn't really work. It wasn't very good from a user's point of view, and it was a little bit confusing, so that had to go. And as I said before, we needed to identify a sustainable path for the website, so we didn't want to just launch something and then get back to the same position. We wanted to keep iterating on that for years to come. So, one of the main learnings we had was gaining autonomy. I think that's often a big discussion at these events every year, and was something that we knew we needed if we were going to deliver the project in time. So at the start of the project, we had a launch date. The launch date was June 2018. That was what we were told. That was to fall in line with the university's new strategic framework. So this was, again, what the university wanted to achieve over the next 10 years. And we were a really key part of that, or rather the website was a really key part of delivering that strategic framework. Now, as I'm sure you'll all agree, working in higher education is great, but decision-making sometimes can be challenging. There are different committees, different groups, etc. So we knew that autonomy had to be agreed, that we had at the start of the project. So my role in the project was to make sure we overcame challenges like that, managing budget, managing the team resource, and keeping our key stakeholders up to date. So to get all of this autonomy in place, we did a number of things. We set up a project advisory board. So this board was small, had about 8 people on it, and it was members were from across the university, where they could provide real guidance and real steer, but also had influence in the various parts of the organisation. So that included directors, we had key people from IT, finance, etc. We then, in that group, agreed what that interaction and the involvement of the sort of exec level staff was going to be. So what we hang on, bear with me a second. From a day-to-day point of view, we decided off the bat that decision-making would be made within this team. Anything that we needed to refer to the advisory board, we would take our opinion and what we were going to do, and we would let them know in that advisory board scenario. And then through that forum, we agreed how we would work with exec. And that started with the initial calls with all of our exec team between Decent to kind of have a one-to-one conversation. I think there's about 40 calls, something like that. There was a lot of calls. And it understood their requirements from a senior level, but also it helped us to identify how we should shape our approach to communication with all of those members. Now, the brand project had been through a rigorous process, so exec were all completely bought into this, senior management of the university. Everybody's really bought into the whole idea. And because of that coming first, we agreed with the project board that we would ultimately share 3-page concepts to our vice-chancellor at the end of the design phase. And that would be the approval to say, you're on the right path, carry on. So that was the homepage, a course page, and a research story, which you can see a few of there. This is all our exec or our vice-chancellor got to sign off during the project, because we'd had the brand project first. This was kind of just validating we were still on the same path, and that's all we had to do. Now, we also made quite drastic changes around the structure of the website, taxonomies used across the website, but because we'd used research so heavily and insights during the initial stage of the project, this was all relatively straightforward because we had the evidence to back everything up. But Nick will talk a bit more about that shortly. The only slight caveat was around the homepage. So this all went really, really quickly. We got sign-off really, really fast from the VC about all of this. The thing that took time was just before the launch of the website, agreeing what image would be on the homepage. It took a lot longer than any of that did. Now, the other area that we've learned quite a lot from is around realistic budgeting. Now, I realise these projects, invariably, you get given a budget and that's the budget. But how we structured that, I think, was quite important. So the conversations to agree the project budget started about 18 months before the project actually started. So Peter and I weren't really involved. In fact, part of it was before I was even in the team. So our marketing director and head of brand had started writing papers and presenting to exec for a long period before this. And the message was basically, we need to overhaul our website, we need a new approach. And if we're to compete with other institutions, we need to do that fairly soon. It's fairly competitive. So while it took that sort of 18-month period from start to finish, we got a commitment to the budget and ultimately had control and drove how that budget was spent. And how we spent that budget was generally, we split it over a 3-year period. And what we decided at the outset was we wanted to partner with an agency who could deliver on the areas we felt we lacked expertise. So objective tech and skills audits, the user research, the design work, UX, content strategy, etc. We also built an approximate cost with any new services, any new platforms that we wanted to use as part of the website, such as the search, governance tools, content delivery network, things like that. And then we also budgeted for external suppliers to rewrite significant volumes of content on the website. We knew that from starting the project to the launch, we didn't have time to go out to the whole university and say, right, let's start rewriting everything. It wasn't going to work, so we were going to use external suppliers. However, there were some slight deviations to this in reality that we learned as we went along. So one of those was about 6 months in, we decided that actually, rather than putting money external for copywriting, etc., we wanted to get some resource in-house. So we went out to market and we were able to get a great content editor who was a journalist, and that has paid dividends since we've done that. We also decided to use some budget to get a junior member of the team to support as a frontline member of support. We've discovered that since having a better website, expectations are higher. User requests from across the university have come in greater numbers. Our old email inbox, that didn't work anymore. And actually those requests were now to about 5,000 in the last 12 months, and those range from a 5-minute fix to a 5-day project. So the volume of requests has risen quite significantly. And ultimately, the cost that went out of house for delivering the launch of new sites, so the stuff with Decent, etc., was only a small part of the 3-year budget. We agreed with exec that we needed to make a sustained investment, and we're now going into the process of how we invest in years to come, so that we could keep the website at the sort of the top of its game and keep it working really well for us, and allow us to continue to evolve the site.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, I'm Nick, Head of Product and Experience Design at Decent, and I led on the user research and experience design part of this project. So we really learned on this one about getting the right level of collaboration for all the different levels of stakeholders. So we started off, as Rob said, by engaging directly with the senior stakeholders. So that was, one-to-one calls to get that early buy-in, to make them feel like they were able to provide their input immediately and understand the progress of the project. It was crucial, really, to understand their vision so that we all knew we were going in the same direction. Even if that's just a conversation, they were only sort of half-hour calls, but they were laid the foundations for the whole project. Luckily for us, the brand project had already happened, and actually it helped align everyone we spoke to on the goals of the website. For the direction of travel, it gave us good momentum. We obviously did this with a lot of different organisations, and you can't really underestimate how important that was. It made our life really easy, coming in and being able to focus immediately on the website itself and not on stakeholder management. We then started to look at engaging the more direct stakeholders, so the subject matter experts, the ones responsible for the day-to-day delivery of these services. It was crucial for us to lean on their expertise, because obviously they're in it day to day, and we've come in and do the research, so we need to facilitate them to provide the knowledge. So we did that really, just to give you some examples of, for every area of focus we chose, there was 4 we identified. We would do a user story mapping workshop with them initially to understand the features that they believe support the user journey, the goals that users are trying to achieve, and then take that into a design sprint. So we didn't do the full Google design sprint, if people are aware of that, but we did a condensed version where we start off with understanding the problem by reviewing the research that we'd done, which I'll cover in a second, that was relevant to that specific area. For example, an outline of the user journey, summary of user interviews, any data analysis we've done. Then we'd go into generating ideas before sketching some solutions. And one really important part of that was looking at how other sectors do it. So I think you can sort of become a bit focused on your own sector and how other people are providing core search, whereas actually when you break the problem down, we looked at other ways of how people make life-changing investments, which is essentially what a course is. So how does car purchasing work, how do house buying work, and sort of transferring that out of your specific sector. And then the output of the design sprints was a prototype that we then tested. Again, I'll talk about that in a second. It's quite a big ask to get people in a room for 2 days, which is what our design sprint was, but it was really crucial for that core group to get that ownership of the solution, and co-creating that gave them that real ownership that we could take forwards. The other level of collaboration I wanted to just touch on was between us, so like the project team. So us being an agency and the internal team, it was really crucial to get that one team approach, because we each have other strengths that we can bring to the project. These guys internally were able to help us navigate the internal politics that sometimes exist in universities. And they helped shield us from unnecessary distraction and making sure we spoke to the right people at the appropriate time. Whereas we were able to bring in, from an external position, you can bring a fresh perspective and challenge stakeholders much more than they could do internally. We had no sort of prior agenda or bias associated with us, so we could challenge the preconceptions and ways of working that were quite deeply embedded within the university. And it also helps being external. People tend to trust what we say slightly more, for better or worse, than the internal ones. And this tight working relationship also enabled us to upskill and transfer knowledge to the university team directly. So they ended up with a toolkit of resources from the content strategy work, for example, and they've adopted the design sprint model to take forward future innovation. So as Rob mentioned, the core foundations of the whole project was about being evidence-led. The first step that we took was to look at the analytics data. So, there's no better way of understanding what people want than looking at how people are currently using it and what tasks they're trying to achieve. Having identified the key user groups, we then spoke to them. Fairly simple, but amazingly powerful. We spoke to potential and current students of all varieties, careers advisors, academics, business representatives. Being able to relay those sort of nuggets of insight back later on down the line is really powerful. Being able to link it to someone specific you can name and say, this person experienced this, it brings it to life a lot more. We then took this data into the design sprints, as I mentioned, to develop a potential solution, which we then took the prototype and tested again with users. Just another touch point we had with them. We could ask them questions again, further understand their journey, and take forward other parts of it. For example, we card sorted with them while we tested. So while we were doing an information architecture review to really look at the structure of the site, we combined that. So making the best use of our time with users. This strong evidence base that this gave us allowed us to remove opinions from the decision-making process, reframing our recommendations from, we're experts, this is what we think, to this is what people are actually saying, together let's come up with a solution. And reframing that conversation takes away a lot of the confrontation. It's really helpful. So a good example of this working in practice was we recommended removing the international section from the main navigation. And when I was walking the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, I think, through it, she was very sort of keen on that section, was challenging back on it, which was completely fair. She was worried it would lose that impact for international students, which was a priority. But because we had the interview data showing how similar those journeys were to domestic, and the analytics data to corroborate it, and the tree test results showing that findability wasn't affected, it became the natural choice to sort of go ahead with. And this evidence-led approach didn't stop at the relaunch either. We've carried it on with other projects and carried it on with all the new feature development and innovation. So that's my bit covered over.
Thanks, Nick. So onto the build process. So we decided to split our front end and CMS build into two separate phases. So starting with the front end build, this was carried out in collaboration with Decent. So I was seconded to their team full-time, working with the developer from Decent. And then we had project management and testing from them as and when it was required. We run this process as a series of 7 two-week time boxes, and this followed an agile methodology. And the output of this was a standalone digital pattern library compiled using an open source framework called Fractal. This now provides our one source of truth, and it's independent from our CMS, and it's really changed the way we develop. So in the past, when we had a new component, we build it straight into the CMS. Now, we build the front end first. It allows us to browser and accessibility test the code. So when it comes to the CMS build, it means that the code is all ready to go. We can focus on the logic. And this was really key to enable us to deliver the project on time. There's an example from Fractal on the screen there. So it packages our pattern library in a neat way that's given us a resource we can now really easily share. So for every component, the code can be easily accessed from the panels along the bottom, along with other information about the component. So far, this has been used to create assets that are on brand by our in-house IT department. An example on the left there, to create landing pages by a company who live streamed our graduation, and on the right, to create a Chinese site by one of our overseas partners. Now, I know Google Translate got a reference yesterday from the guys at Southampton, and I can vouch for its unreliability. It translated our copy describing Derby as the hometown of arrogance and prejudice, which couldn't be further from the truth. So onto our CMS build, which was in Terminal 4, and that was carried out in-house by myself. The idea was to do this as a waterfall approach to delivery, so to prioritise components that we used on general content pages first, to allow migration to start while the more specialised builds took place. In practice, this worked really well for us because the two phases of the project overlap so much. So we were able to start the content migration a full 12 weeks before the build was finished, and this enabled us to hit our tight deadline. In terms of the setup to the CMS, we knew this had to change as well. Our old site had become really difficult to manage. We had 246 components and 111 different page layouts, but they weren't all compatible with one another. So this was really difficult for us to manage, let alone for our web editors, for who it was confusing and it was really limiting. To solve this, we built a set of assets that can now be used across the site. We have a total of 60 components, as opposed to over 200, and just a single page layout. But of those 60, 20 can be used by any user on the site to build any kind of content everywhere. So previously, you can see on the left is an example of our old case study component. So this had a defined layout, so it had a field for a title, an intro, copy, an image, etc. But now, a case study can be made up of any number of components, meaning instead it can now look like what you see on the right. This has given our web editors the freedom and the flexibility to create content within the brand, but without being tied to a specific layout. On to our final point, which is governance. So to give some background to the old website, this was launched in Terminal 4 in 2013, but the content was moved over from the existing CMS as it was. So existing issues came with it. So I'm sure I've heard some of these mentioned already, but there was a lack of governance. So we had 167 moderators. These are users that could publish to the live site. This led to a site structure that hadn't been planned and it had grown ad hoc over the years. So we had a navigation structure that was confusing and bloated. We had issues with content duplication and also internal structures being mirrored to an external audience. The first step to tackle these was to change the operating model. We knew we needed to reduce the size of the pool of the number of people who could publish and improve their digital skill set. We went from 167 down to 50 moderators, allowing 1 to a maximum of 3 per group, depending on the size of the group. To address the skill set, we knew we needed to revamp our approach to training, and our new look training is now split into 2 levels. The first for contributors who can't publish but can create and edit content now starts with an overview of best practice. So this is before they even go near the CMS. So areas like SEO, creating accessible content and writing style are covered before they go onto a vocational part where they start creating content. Having this introduction to best practice has given our web editors the foundation to get them at least starting to think along the same lines as we do when they're creating their content. Our moderators who can publish go on to a second session. And this goes into standards, particularly accessibility, in a lot more depth. We make it crystal clear what their responsibilities are, the kind of things to look out for, and the impact this can have on a user's experience. The session then concludes with a test. They're given a page to moderate, and it has a variety of errors. They must hit a pass rate of 60% or higher to pass to gain their moderator status. In the interest in fairness and to develop the test, in our team we all take it as well, and it can provoke some very interesting discussions, particularly when a web developer beat our content editor. So that was nice. Our training is supported by a knowledge base, some examples of the kind of content we're now creating to support our editors with how-to articles and videos, our team blog where we share best practice, and we now run bi-weekly drop-in sessions. So these are where web editors can book half-an-hour slots to talk about anything, to work through problems and discuss project work, so it's really good for engaging with them. Given the autonomy we had on the project, which Rob spoke about earlier, we were able to roll this out with full support. There were some small pockets of resistance early on, but because we had the clear backing and with some clear reasoning, it was straightforward to get everyone on board. My advice would be to not underestimate the time and resource that governance and everything that comes with it takes. So that's not just during the project, but it's after the project as well, absorbing it as part of your day-to-day in order to maintain a high standard. But as a result, in sticking to our guns, the change in approach has meant the right to publish is now taken a lot more seriously in the organisation, and it's given us far more control over what goes on the live website. A project of this size in-house for us was a first, and along the way we've learnt a lot, but it has now significantly changed how we operate on a day-to-day basis. I hope our story has given you some useful insight. Thank you very much for listening, and welcome any questions.
Thanks very much, that was brilliant. Has anyone got any questions? Are there any questions up on Slido or Twitter? We have our roving mics ready to rove. There's one over there.
I'm Chris Sheridan from Swansea. We've on a similar journey ourselves in terms of we've got a branded website. We've gone through a big process of trying to get it launched. You mentioned tree testing. I'm curious about the end user testing as well. I presume there was some of that involved in, because it's just curious to compare what we did and what you did, if we could do anything better.
So just on the tree testing, was that? I couldn't hear.
Tree testing, and was there any other sort of end user testing as well involved, or was it mainly tree testing?
Yeah, so the tree testing we did a couple of iterations of to test both the current one and then the new structures. We did prototype testing out the back of the design sprint, including with accessibility needs, so visual impairments, all the rest of it. And because we were ending at the component level, we didn't in the agency test the whole solution, but we tested sort of at each touch point through. And yeah, that's probably the testing we did on that.
Well, I'm just wondering how you developed the user stories. Were they all based on interviews, and how was it easy to get buy-in to actually base everything from user stories?
Let's begin. So we did the user story mapping workshops prior to the design sprint. That was more high-level, sort of epic sort of user stories we were looking at. And then out of the final design, so when we had the final component designs, we then break those down into specific user stories, but that was all handled within the internal team. So we'd write them from a design perspective, and we'd check them with the development perspective with Pete. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering what they were. You were from, was it user interviews or?
Yeah, so the user stories actually themselves were written on the component level. So that was all informed from the design sprints, which was informed by the research. So they ended up very specific, but initially led by the research, if that makes sense.
We've got a question that's been submitted on Slido. How have users found having to do a test to be given moderator access? Did you get pushback on that?
Yes, a little bit, but again, it was really worth sticking to our guns. We have since, we also keep an eye on our moderators as well. If we notice bad practice, there's kind of a 2 strikes and you're out. So we have taken moderation away and absorbed it into the team, because at the end of the day, we've got our website looking good and the content structured well, and we really want to keep it that way.
Kind of related to that question, how did you get agreement on what image should be on the homepage?
It was probably more a time case. It was the day before it was going to go live, and they had to make a decision. That was probably I think we went with 3 options, or a couple of options, showed them what it would look like at mobile and on desktop, and they just made a decision on that.
Cool.
And so last day.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, guys. I think we'll get set up for the next talk. So, one more appreciation for University of Derby. Thank you. Well done.